How goes it, Card Fighters? I'm Gleaming Garmore, and today we're going to take a look at the most powerful nation in all of Overdress. That's right, we're going to take a look at Touken Ranbu, baby! Woo! Touken Ranbu is a collaboration with the titular Touken Ranbu Online mobile and browser game. Now, here's the thing about Touken Ranbu is they're not going to receive regular support like other nations, so they had to put very good cards in this set. But we're going to talk about a deck that is not a part of the booster set. We're actually going to talk about the trial deck and how you can upgrade it. That's right, we're going to be focusing on the ride line of Kashu Kiyomitsu. Now, for those of you joining us from the Touken Ranbu community, I thought it would be nice to tell you all that Kashu was actually my starter sword. And as such, I was very excited when they said that he would be his own deck in Vanguard Overdress, as opposed to just being a first Vanguard in the previous collaborations. Now, of course, I've got the Touken Ranbu rares of all of the cards in my ride deck. And I've got a couple of more Touken Ranbu rares in the main deck itself. But for now, we're just going to look at our blinged up special boy. And we're going to take this one slow, because I want it to be somewhat accessible for those of us who aren't Vanguard players already. For those of us who are joining the game because of the Touken Ranbu collaboration, rather than picking up the Touken Ranbu collaboration because they already play Vanguard. Now, let's start with our first Vanguard, which is the base form Kashu Kiyomitsu. I suppose I should also show you what the non-Touken Ranbu rare versions of these cards look like. So I will pull them out as we move along. First of all, there is this one. So we've got Kashu Kiyomitsu as our starting Vanguard. Now, as a starter, he has a skill that is the same as every other starter. But again, you might be here because you're new. So, I'll tell you what it is. When you ride upon this unit, that is when a unit is placed on top of this one on your Vanguard circle, if you went second, you'll draw a card. This is very short, sweet, and to the point. It's not that important. Just remember that the second player draws a card whenever they ride when in standard format. But where we really start getting interesting is Kashu Kiyomitsu Sento. Kashu Sento, his non-Touken Ranbu rare version, looks like this. The artwork is the same, but the background is different, unlike the first Vanguard version. Now, Kashu Sento has a skill. When you ride upon him with Kashu Toku, which is the grade 2 Kashu, you can look at the top card of your deck, and you can either put it on top of the deck or put it into the soul, which is the stack of cards underneath your Vanguard. Now, you can use this to manipulate whatever you're going to see on your second turn drive check, or your draw off of a card we'll talk about in a second. Actually, let's talk about him now. You can use him to manipulate your draw off of Kenshin Kagemitsu. And Kenshin, as a non-Touken Ranbu rare, looks like this. But Kenshin is actually a double rare from the title booster. He does not come in the trial deck. I'll be sure to point out which cards are in the trial deck whenever we get to them, because I'm sure somebody bought the trial deck and is looking on how to upgrade it. But Kenshin, at the end of the battle that he boosts, that is, gives power to the guy in front of him, can counterblast one and put him into the soul to draw a card and give another unit an extra 2,000 power till the end of the turn. So, if you ride Kashu Toku, use Kashu Sento's skill, and you see a card that you want in your hand on top of your deck, you can call this behind a rear guard, use that rear guard to attack, boosted by Kenshin, and then you can draw that card and give power to your Vanguard. Or sorry, that's not Toku, that's Kiwame. Toku. There we go. But then we get into the skill of Kashu Toku. Kashu Toku's skill also activates when he's rid upon by the grade 3 Kashu Kiwame. Kashu Toku searches out, and if you're a Touken Ranbu fan, you might know exactly what sword he searches out. He searches out Yamato no Kami Yasusada, whose non-Touken Ranbu rare version looks like this. And Yamato no Kami Yasusada is a card that we play just one copy in the deck because it is searched out by Kashutoku, and it's also not, his skill is useful, but it's not the most important card you can be playing. You want to play this card in your deck, partially because it gets searched out, but also because, like, it can just turn itself into a 20k or even 30k beater for fairly cheap and easy, which this deck needs. This deck needs power on its rearguards, and Yasusada can provide that. Yamato no Kami Yasusada's skill is on the rearguard. He can counterblast 1, and this is not once per turn. So if you're just here and you haven't ever seen a once per turn marker, which looks something like that, if it'll focus up. I'm sorry, if I bring it in slower, will it focus in? Something like that, and it's pink and it says 1 over turn. If you haven't seen a once per turn marker, essentially any effect that doesn't have that 1 per turn on it is not once per turn. You can use it as many times as you want, provided you can pay the cost and meet its conditions. But non once per turn, you can counterblast 1 to give him 5,000 power, unless your Vanguard is Kashu Kiyomitsu Kiwame. Kashu Kiwame allows Yasusada to give himself 10,000 power instead of just 5,000. Which is really useful because it pushes you up an extra card in hand threshold, a magic number for the players that are just joining us. I think I'll leave a link in the description to the Yellow Card Vanguard video on magic numbers because it's very useful for people just learning the game, and I think you guys will enjoy it a lot. But Yasusada, again, he's a one-of. He's not the most important card in the deck, but you absolutely need to play him so that you can 9 out of 10 times search him off of Kashutoku. Every once in a while, you're going to draw this card prematurely, or you're going to damage check him, but that does not mean you should play more copies, because you very much need the space for the other cards we're going to play in this deck. Next, we've got Kashu Kiyomitsu Kiwame. Kashu Kiwame, as a non-Touken Ranbu rare, looks like this. I prefer his Touken Ranbu rare art a lot. It's a lot more action-oriented. It looks like he's ready for battle. He has 2 abilities. The first is a continuous ability, which means that it is always active as long as its condition is met. During your turn, if you have no face-up cards in your damage zone, that is to say, if you've counterblasted all the damage in your damage zone, he gains 10,000 power. And he also has an act once per turn. This one's once per turn. You can both counterblast 1 and soul blast 1 to look at the top card of your deck. Then you can place that card on the top or the bottom of your deck, and you can draw 1 card. Now, this is one of the many ways that you gain advantage in this deck, is by using Kashu's skill to draw you a card every single turn. But you might be wondering, what use is looking at the top card of your deck if you can only put it on the bottom right before you draw another card? Well, we have a few other top deck checking cards in our list. We have exactly 2 to be precise, because unfortunately I could only find 2 that were any good. Well, actually, there's one more. There's one more top checker, but he only does it in the battle phase, so it's not really all that relevant. We'll talk about it in a second. But they have 2 main phase top deck checkers in the form of Hyuga Masamune and Heshikiri Hasabe. Heshikiri is a grade 2 that, when placed on the rearguard circle, allows you to check 2 cards from the top of your deck and rearrange them on the top in any order. So, for example, let's say I see Yasusada and our overtrigger, Kashu Kiyomitsu Shinken Hisatsu. I see those on top of my deck. And I know that the overtrigger draws me a card when it's drive checked. But they're in this order, right? They're in the order of Yasusada and then overtrigger. What I can do is I can switch the order of these 2 cards so that when I attack with my Vanguard, I drive check my overtrigger, I draw the Yasusada, and then I have a chance to check another trigger on top of that. Or what I could do is I could arrange them like this, keeping Yasusada on top, and use Kashu's skill, looking at the Yasusada, drawing it into my hand, and then calling it down so I have another rearguard. I think Heshikiri's skill is most useful as a setup for Kashu Kiwame, because, well, Heshikiri cannot move cards from the top of your deck. He can give you a glimpse at what Kashu is going to see. He can give you 2 cards down, in fact, so that if you see a card on top that you don't want, you can place that card on top. Then you can have Kashu look at it, put it on the bottom, and then you can draw the other card that you saw with Heshikiri. And then the other top deck checker we have is Hyuga Masamune. Hyuga Masamune, when placed, if your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, so if you're on Kashu Kiwame, you can look at the top card of your deck, and you can place it either on the top or on the bottom. So the difference between Hyuga and Heshikiri is that Hyuga checks only one card, but he can also remove it from the top of your deck. While Heshikiri checks 2 cards, but the most you can do is change which order they are on top of your deck. You cannot put any of them on the bottom. So both of these cards interact wonderfully with Kashu's skill, allowing you to take a glimpse into your future, draw cards, put cards back, or draw cards you want, check triggers you want. It's sort of like for your more experienced Vanguard players, it's sort of like a light version of Hexa Orb Sorceress. But this deck does have other tricks up its sleeve that make it distinct from just playing Hexa Orb again. That said, I do like this aspect of the deck as somewhat of a Hexa Orb enjoyer myself. You might know that the last time I entered a standard tournament, I went undefeated with Hexa Orb. So you might say I'm a fan of that deck. Let's take a look at what we use to turn the game around when we go to 5 damage. Or more accurately, close out the game when it's looking like it could go either way, when we're at the brink of defeat. And you Touken Ranbu players, the way I've talked about this, you might know exactly what mechanic I'm talking about. That's right, Shinken Hisatsu. Shinken Hisatsu is an ability that activates in Touken Ranbu Online when a sword is pushed up against a wall, when that sword is about to break, when that sword is at its limit, it's almost out of health, where it becomes extra powerful and it delivers a strong finishing blow to whatever challenge is in front of it. And then if you're smart, you get out of there and you go back to your forge and you go heal the sword. You go repair the sword. But in addition to Shinken Hisatsu, which functions almost exactly like it does in the mobile game, by the way, almost exactly, we also have Mikozuki Munechika, who you might know as Gramps or Gigi. He has a variety of skills that all activate when you're at a certain damage threshold. They all activate when he attacks, and you apply the following abilities based on how many cards are in your damage zone. If you have 3 or more cards in your damage zone, then he gains 5,000 power, becoming a 15,000 attacker, hitting 13k Vanguards on his own. If you have 4 or more damage, then you look at the top card of your deck, and you put it on the top or on the bottom. And if you have 5 or more damage, you counterblast 1 and soul blast 1 to stand him back up so that he can attack again. Munechika is very important in the finishing turns of the deck. Otherwise, you're just going to be a piddly 3 attack deck, and you're not going to be able to kill your opponent. You're not going to be able to force any pressure through. You're not going to be able to look at the top cards of your deck, scout out for triggers, put those triggers on the restood Munechikas, and attack with them. The other damage-gated effect that we have is the effect of Kashu Kiyomitsu Shinken Hisatsu. This is what Kashu Shinken Hisatsu looks like in regular foil, and I only have a few of them with me here today, but there's actually a Shinken Hisatsu card for each of the starter swords, and you can just play whichever one is your favorite. They all have the same card text on them because you can only run one over trigger in a deck anyway. So printing multiple ones with the same text is not going to conflict in any way, like it might in a game like Weiss Wars, where they have like 8 cards that have the same text on them and the same abilities on them, and you can just play them all. I don't get it. Weiss Wars players, log off. But the effects of this card are as follows. When it's checked as a trigger, you give one of your units 100 million power until the end of the turn. You draw a card, and you remove this card from the game. In addition, if it's revealed on your drive check, so when you're attacking with your Vanguard, all of your units gain critical +1 until the end of the turn. But you might have noticed that these over triggers don't have any power printed on them or any shield value. That's because these are the world's first trigger order cards. They are order cards, and you can play them from your hand and activate the play effect on them. The Overtrigger's play effect in this nation is choose one of your Vanguards, and it gets +1 crit until end of turn. But in addition, If your damage zone has 5 or more cards, all of your units gain 10,000 power until end of turn. So, as you can see, it's very effective when you're pushed against the brink. You give 20k to each column on your board. In the case of Munechika, you can attack with it, restand it, attack with it again with the buff from Shinken Hisatsu. You can even put your triggers that you check on your Vanguard swing on it. These are a very deadly combination, and I implore you to think and plan out when exactly you want to go to 5 damage. A lot of your games will end on 5 damage for you because Munechika and Shinken Hisatsu are such powerful cards, and you want to use Munechika's restand at by all means necessary. It'd actually be really useful if this deck had, say, a Limit Break era self-damager. I would probably play it, honestly, because of Munechika. You want to play both of these cards. You want to use both of their effects. Sometimes you check this card as an overtrigger, and it's good. It's even better. Sometimes it's even better when you are just playing it from your hand and finishing the game, because then you can choose when you use that. You can choose when you use that, and you can hit your opponent where they're most vulnerable. I won't say that, like, oh, this card being an overtrigger doesn't matter, because, God, it does. It really matters if this card is an overtrigger. If this card was like a crit trigger, and then, like, this deck didn't have an overtrigger and you couldn't play, like, the Cray Elemental one, it would suck. It'd be awful. But the fact that, like, on trigger, this is just like a triple crit, a crit to 3 units. And on play, this is a crit to 1 unit, and then everything gains trigger power? This card's crazy. There is also an argument for playing the Cray Elemental Overtrigger in this deck. I do think that one is also very good, mainly because of its 50k shield value. But I also enjoy the agency that this card gives me. Like, this is the most good feeling overtrigger to play with, because a lot of the time I have a choice in how it's used. Whereas other overtriggers are like, yeah, those sure do exist. Those sure do exist, and that sure did win the game, huh? We've got 2 examples of defenses in our deck. We've got Yamabushi Kunihiro, who, if your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, gains 5k shield, so he becomes a 10k shield, whether he's guarding or intercepting or whatever. And whenever he's retired from the guard circle or the rear guard circle, you can Soul Blast 1 to put him on the bottom of your deck. I very rarely use the put him on the bottom of your deck effect, but him being a 10k shield that you can play a light number of in your deck is very useful. And then this one is a card that I'm sure for the Touken Ranbu fans, we're going to spark some discourse, all right? So in every Vanguard deck, you need to play 4 of what is called a Sentinel, or a Perfect Guard. There are 2 Sentinels in the Touken Ranbu nation. There are 2 of them. There's Hakusan, and there's Imano Tsurugi. Imano Tsurugi is what we call an old PG. So named because they have the same text as the PGs that have existed in the previous 9 years of Vanguard. Hakusan is what we call a new PG, because he has an ability that is unique to perfect guards in the standard format. So, regardless of which one you play, they both have the same basic concept. You place these on the Guardian Circle, you discard a card from your hand, and then whoever is being attacked cannot be hit for that attack. However, Hakusan has a key advantage over Imano Tsurugi. If your hand has 1 or less cards in it after you've placed Hakusan down, you no longer have to discard a card. The catch with that is that any time that you would call this card from hand, even if you're not activating the Perfect Guard ability, you have to discard a card. So that leads to an argument in favor of playing Imano Tsurugi, which is that if your opponent makes you guard with 2 or more cards out of your hand, you can call down 2 Imano Tsurugis and only resolve 1 of them. Whereas if you call down 2 Hakusans, you would have to discard for both. But that's a very niche scenario, and in general, I would recommend that you play Hakusan instead of Imano Tsurugi. And I'm sorry to the Imano Tsurugi fans in my comments, but gameplay-wise, Hakusan is just the better option. Also, Hakusan is from the booster set, and the Over Trigger is from the trial deck, but you can get them from box toppers as well. What's next? What's next, I believe, is our Resource Engine, which is 2 cards we have in Touken Ranbu Rare. I've already shown you Kenshin before. I'll show you Sanchomo now. Sanchomo, when placed, if you Persona Road this turn, lets you countercharge 1. That's take a card in your damage zone and turn it back face up so you can then use it for counterblast costs. You play this at about 3 copies in the deck. I've tried it at 4. If you're smart about how you use your counterblast, you don't actually need that many copies of Sanchomo, but it's very appreciated to have access to a countercharge in this deck, especially when you're using cards like Kenshin Kagemitsu to draw you cards and they cost a counterblast, and especially when your Vanguard is counterblasting 1 almost every turn. You don't use Kashu's skill every single turn, but you use it almost every turn. You get it? The final category of cards in this deck I want to talk about is what we're using to actually beat face in. Like, how are we attacking? We're attacking with Gramps, with Monoyoshi Sadamune, and with Kenshin Kagemitsu. Now you might notice that when I say attacking, I do mean boosting. I do mean boosting for half of these. And that's because Gigi is our main attacker, our main beater. He gets to 15k, and he can restand in the late game, and he can arrange the cards on top of your deck so that you check triggers more often. Monoyoshi Sadamune has a very interesting skill that you're going to catch a lot of opponents off guard with. That is, in the back row, when this unit's power would be increased or decreased by a trigger effect. When this unit's power would be increased by a trigger effect, you double that increase. So if I choose him with the 10,000 power on my critical trigger, he gains 20,000 power. And the way you would want to use this is you would give the power from your trigger to 1 unit, and you'd give the critical to the one in front of him. So for those of you who are new here, you can actually split the effects of a critical trigger. You give 10,000 power and you give 1 critical, but you do not have to give those 2 things to the same unit. So even though Sadamune's critical will not be used for his attack because he's boosting and not attacking, you can give the power to him and you can give the critical to whatever he's boosting. And essentially, you've given plus 20 and a crit to that column. And then I've talked about the effects of Kenshin and Mikazuchi, but I do want you to know that you use these to build powerful boards of units and mount large attacks on your opponent. These are what gets you power in your deck. These are what gets you power, as well as the one of Yasusada. These are all very important cards to be playing. Otherwise, how are you going to kill your opponent? How are you going to win? That's what I want to ask you, is how are you going to win? What are you going to do? You're just going to hope for your opponent to no guard and then you're going to check crit and win? Well, sometimes that happens. It's happened to me. This deck is very good at checking crit and then winning, because your opponent will see you check top 2 and then go, yeah, you're probably bluffing. There's not double crit on top. And then you have double crit on top because you're just that good at this game. You're just godly. But with all that put together, our deck list should look something like this. If you have any questions, or if you are perhaps a new Touken Ranbu player or a fan of Touken Ranbu who is a new Vanguard player, why don't you leave me a comment? I'd love to read them. I'd love to answer them. Whatever you have to say about this deck profile, about this deck list, any improvements that you think could be made because, I don't know, you've actually read Touken Ranbu cards, unlike the majority of this player base, which I don't blame you. There's a lot of cards. If you have anything to say about it, leave a comment. And also, if you want to see more videos like this, or perhaps even me taking a look at the other Touken Ranbu ride lines today, or not today, but in general, the other Touken Ranbu ride lines, feel free to look at the links in my description and support me for as little as $1 a month. Anyway, I've been Gleaming Garmore, and I'll see you guys some other time. Bye-bye.